Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. I'm here with Bruce. Bruce, for everyone out there listening who hasn't caught your first episode, would you mind reintroducing yourself?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on again, Robbie. My name is Bruce Olav Solheim. I got that funny middle name, but that's because I'm Norwegian or of Norwegian extraction. My parents are from Norway. I am 66 years old now. So I just had a birthday, and I'm a professor of history at Citrus College. In my lifetime, I have served 8 years in the U.S. Army. I've been a defense contractor, a Fulbright scholar, but most of the time I've spent as an academic. And during that whole time, during my whole life, I've had experiences, paranormal experiences, including ET or classic UAP, UFO stuff, alien contact, I guess, best way to say it. And I've always, I was afraid until recently, the last 7 years, to really talk to anybody about it because of security clearances or job considerations. And when I did try to mention stuff to people, they didn't react well, at least my academic colleagues. So it wasn't until my friend died, a childhood friend died in 2016, that I had a vision of him, which wasn't unusual for me to have a vision of a dead person, or what we would call a dead person. And he told me it was okay to start telling my stories, and the timing was right. And of course, about a year later is when the Tic Tac videos came out, and people just started going crazy. So, and I don't know where we're at now. It's kind of confusing if you look at the news and listen to the government and so forth. But so that's where I am. I mean, I have 4 children that are all grown up and 2 grandchildren, and I'm nearing retirement, but I don't want to retire because I enjoy teaching too much. And I think young people actually need me. And as long as you feel needed in your job, I think why quit? You know, it gets to a point if you can't do your job anymore, that's something else. But anyway, that's kind of a and I'm married to Ginger, who keeps me grounded. So there you go. That's enough of a snapshot, I think.
I love that you still love your job because there's plenty of people that really are just screaming at their steering wheel in the parking lot, hoping not to go in. But especially when it comes to, I think you have a very easy going vibe, and I think that's what a lot when my generation connects to is you're speaking to on our level. Our discussion here is going to be about the UAP phenomenon and alien experiences. Did you find hesitation with a lot of the academics was because of the stigma that comes with it because it had been labeled for so long, or did you find that there was a lot of people that probably had a belief, much like the paranormal experience? If you ask somebody, have they ever had a paranormal experience? They'll be like, "No, that's crazy," or then they'll go, well, there was this one time, and it's like they can't explain these certain things, but we all have like a need inside of us to look up at the stars at night, and we like to look out and just explore. Like, we can't be the only things in this universe. I think it would be stupid to even think that at this point. But I find a lot of academics, after the UAP kind of was announced by the government or these things that they could not identify, were a little bit more open about speaking about it. People that I've had on my show that totally discounted it and said it was a nut job thing to even suggest, like radio astronomers, friends of mine that actually work in fields of academic study of astrophysics and all this, who are just now full into the whole thing. And I'm like, this is fantastic, but where were you when I was into it? Because now once the government said it, I'm like, I ain't with it anymore.
Hmm. No, it's yeah. So fear of they're worried about career advancement. They're worried about being shunned by their colleagues. And that doesn't mean they haven't had experiences. I think it was Dean Radin, the chief scientist for IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, that said that a survey he did of scientists and engineers and technicians found that about 75% of them have had paranormal and or UFO experiences, but not very many of them talk about it. And especially with people who rely on grants. And once again, probably a lot of that is there's private grants, but a lot of them are government grants too, are worried about losing their funding sources. And the more woo woo your research, the more so-called woo-woo, right? The less chance you're going to get approved. And so I think that's where that's coming from. Of course, in the government world, I mean, in the defense contractor world or the military world, that's just recently opened up with military pilots that they can now report things. In fact, they can report, but commercial airline pilots, civilian commercial airline pilots cannot. There's no mechanism for them to report UFOs or UAPs, which is stifling. The whole it's skewing the data, because it's like, oh, are they only appearing to military people? No, that's not true. Um, so I think all of those reasons, and then just the boggle factor that the late Jim Mars talked about. It's just I don't want to go there. I know there's something, but I don't want to go there because then it's going to disrupt my day to day. Just making a living, doing whatever I got to do, and just my religious beliefs. There's a lot of things it can touch on that would cause people to back off or be very private about it, or just ignore it, even though it's happening to them. And in terms of the government, and I sympathize with what you're saying. I'm very skeptical of everything I hear coming from any government source, and that includes foreign governments as well, not just ours. But I think what it is that there's some in the government that want what they call disclosure, and there's some that don't for various reasons. So there's factions that are arguing or fighting over which way it should go. So you got some that defect, and like a recent whistleblower with the Immaculate Constellation reveal. If you've heard that the last couple of days, that just came out. Yet another special access program that they've named now that the government, of course, denies officially. But so I think that's what we got going. It's very confusing for people. And if you're inclined already to just kind of ignore it or just worry about the day to day and what's in front of me, what's right in front of me, that's where I'm going. It can cause a lot of problems for folks. But anyway, that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question. But
did you find the openness of the government from kind of acknowledging these things that they can't explain flying in the air? Do you find that it's been easier to talk about, or it's been more difficult?
Well, it's easier in the sense that the topic comes up, but where they veer off is that, oh, this is a security threat, and we can't discount foreign enemies, or we can't discount some other explanation. And what we need to do is funnel more money into the Defense Department. So that I think it's kind of it's a deception on their part to kind of give us what some people want to hear. Oh yeah, there is life beyond us, but they're not really saying. If you look at how they parse their words, it's or even deny sometimes that it's extraterrestrial, but they don't say, well, it's not interdimensional. They don't say, oh, this is not, there's no interdimensional thing. They say, no, it's not extraterrestrial. Okay, well, how about future humans or interdimensional? They haven't made those denials yet. So that's, I think, telling, because those words were used by members of Congress coming out of a SCIF, a secure compartmentalized information facility, like what's her name, Luna from Florida. She came out and started talking about interdimensionals, and that's the only time she ever mentioned it. And I think she had just heard it, and then wasn't supposed to say it, probably forgot, or it slipped. And then, of course, David Grush had mentioned that as well. So I think that there's a lot of legal language parsing going on, and there's that faction in the government that some that want to deny it, some that shut it down for security reasons, and some that want to expose it talking about it. Seems to be that it's a defense. It's a matter of defense, that we need to protect ourselves. And my attitude about that whole thing is that is a total derailment of what this is all about, an opportunity for us to evolve and take a leap of consciousness, which we can get into. But anyway, that's kind of where I'm coming from for it. So, but I do understand your skepticism, because people I think it was Friedrich Nietzsche who said that leaders lie when they speak and even more when they write.
My viewpoint on it initially, before speaking with Avi Loeb and many other people, was that it was probably foreign technology or some things that we just haven't come across. Because I know I was always interested in the military style of things and wondering what secret stuff they had on there. But then I had a friend who was on Fox News because he was on my show talking about Area 51. And I was thinking, oh my God, we're going to hear like cool UFO stories or something like that. And then he was like, no, it's all just really cool high tech military equipment. And he had a drone that would fly over and take photos of Area 51, which for everyone out there listening, they said didn't exist a few years ago. And there was a bunch of people about to go storm that thing. But then after he was on my show, like 6 months later, he got raided by the FBI and they basically embarrassed him and destroyed like $15,000 worth of his stuff. And his site does look really conspiratorial, but he was not a conspiratorial guy. And then he went on Fox News and called them out. And then now he's changed his whole opinion. He doesn't understand anything about like even if it was technology that was the government's, but he's like something else has to be going on. And then not even like a couple months later, the whole UAP discussion was brought up by the government, which makes me wonder because, like I said, my initial experience or initial thoughts were military. Now I'm in belief, obviously, that there's we can't be the only things in this universe. I've studied too much or talked to too many researchers about the universe to realize that it would just be stupid to think that. But if you're talking about interdimensional, I'm curious what your experience was like, when your first encounter was like, and also how you've developed what your idea of the aliens are. If they're interdimensional, maybe you can explain how we might be perceiving them in a wrong path. Necessarily not wrong entirely, but maybe just in a wrong direction.
Yeah, and I just want to preface this by saying, based on what you led into that question with, that well, let me come back to that. I'll just answer that question first. As far as I know, there is. I'll just go back to what my friend Gene said in 2016. I asked him all these questions. I mean, when he came to me in that vision, it was in my, like a holographic image. That's how he appeared. I knew it was him. And the first thing I said to him was, Gene, what's it like to be dead? Because I knew he had died, a month before. And he said, Bruce, if I was really dead, like you say it, would I be talking to you like this right now? Would we be having this conversation? And I said, no, you're right. I laughed. He laughed. We had a good laugh. And then I started asking a bunch of questions. Okay, like, is this real? Is this real? Is that, did this really happen? Is this what's going on? I asked about alien. I asked everything, just rapid fire. And he said, hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. Let me save you some time. It's all true. It's all true, Bruce. It's all true. And I said, you're kidding me. He said, no. And so I've been wrestling with that idea. And the idea is that there's so many different timelines that we could end up on. So let's say I make a prediction on your show today. Let's say I say, okay, X will happen in this month of next year or whatever. Now, if we end up in that timeline, I'll be correct. But if we don't, then I look like a fraud. But am I a fraud or was I correct? It depends on which timeline you're in. So I could be right in a certain set of timelines and then maybe not in others. So then you talk about these different world, concepts. And so it can get very, very confusing.
So like infinite outcomes.
Yes. And you don't know which one you're going to be in. But sometimes I'll get information and I can talk about how I get information, which is also an interesting thing. Sometimes I will get it and I'm cautioned. I'm told that predictions can be wrong, but preparations are never wrong. And sometimes I'll be told this will be true in nearly all timelines. That's what I've been hearing lately about certain things. It will be true in almost all timelines. So that means that it's whatever is happening in the quantum world, which is fluid, past, present, everything is all future is all together, right? That it has reverberated back into this dimension and is and because I'm listening, and it really comes down to listening. Um, but we can talk more about that process. But and I'm feeling it, and then I'm being told, yeah, this will likely happen. There's a very good chance of it happening because it's in almost every timeline where this will occur. So, and the other thing, the preface I wanted to say was that the government, when something, well, there's a couple of sayings. One's an old military saying, and one's an intelligence government intelligence saying. The government intelligence saying is that you never attack the message, you attack the messenger. So your friend is a good example of that. You attack the messenger because you want to discredit them, you want to destroy them, you want to intimidate them. And I've there have been attempts to intimidate me, but I don't intimidate very easily because I mean, what are they going to do? I'm nearing retirement. What are they going to say? Okay, you can't teach anymore. Well, I'd be sad about that, but I'll still make a living. I mean, I still have retirement. So when you're over the target is when you get the most flack, flack like anti-aircraft fire. If you're not over the target, nobody's going to be shooting at you. But once you get near that target, you better believe everything's going to come to bear on you. So the closer you are to the truth, the more you're going to be attacked. And I think it's pretty logical. I mean, if you think about it. But in terms of who or what these things are, everybody has a piece of the puzzle. So, like my friend at Montana Tech, now his name escapes me now. Sorry, but he's been on a lot of shows. He has a book called. Well, his theory is that these are future humans that have learned how to time travel or have discovered time travel, so they can come back, and so they're not aliens at all. They're just us, and that's his theory. He said that's what it explains everything: the craft, the encounters, and so forth. And my understanding is that that's part of it, but there are also these interdimensionals that could come in various forms, but they could look very much like us. They could look like reptilians. They can look like insectoids. They could look like the little grays, the big grays, everything in between, the Nordics, whatever. It's there's incredible diversity. We know how much diversity there is on this planet. Can you imagine the diversity in the universe? I mean, so it's all logical to me that it's all true. Like I go back to what Gene said, it's all true. And especially when you think of the many worlds and multiple, outcomes. So my impression is that everybody has a little bit of the truth, but they don't have everything. Obviously, they don't have everything. So that's why skeptics have a field day, because you'll get one guy on your show say, "Oh yeah, the aliens are really just future humans. That's it." Then you get another guy who said, "Oh no, there's a warring faction going on between the people from the reptilians and the insectoids and the grays, and they're all, they've been here doing this." And then some other guy will come on and say, "No, it's all this other thing," and they're absolutely sure that's what it is. Nobody is absolutely sure about anything. That's the problem. And then if you add the dimension of time and space to it, and the different timelines, it becomes a crapshoot. That's why preparation is paramount, whereas predictions can often be wrong. So anyway, that's my overall understanding of how little we know. And I'll share I don't know if I said it last time, but it kind of sums it up. I like to go and look at the stars, like you said you'd like to do. I just did it this morning. I do it at night too, and when I can. And
it gets harder and harder every day, it feels like.
It does. It does. There's obstructions. There's things that are making it harder for us to comprehend on purpose, I think, sometimes. But I went out one night, clear night, beautiful star field. I said, man, I think I'm really starting to understand this stuff a little bit better. And then a voice in my ear, which is sometimes how I get information, said, "Oh, you have no idea." And what that did was it brought me down to size. It said, "Okay, yeah, you're kind of getting a little bit, but man, don't get a big head about this. Don't be mouthing off about how much you think you know or whatever, because there's so much more to know. And because it's an evolutionary process, it's a leap of consciousness. It could take a long time for us to understand this stuff. And maybe we're not ready. Maybe you're not ready, like me individually. Maybe I'm not ready. I'll share with you in terms of the process. I think I'm going way beyond your question, but that's okay. The process, because I'm kind of excited about this. I was out looking at the stars this morning, and occasionally I'll ask, please help me, please help me to increase my power, the abilities I have, to understand or to make these connections and to understand this. And I was told, I was corrected and said, you don't understand. It's not your power. It is the power of the one. It is the power of the universe. What you're doing, what what we can do for you, or what you can do for yourself, is to increase your ability to listen, increase your ability to see, increase your ability to feel. And that's what you can do. That is, it's not our power, it's the power of the universe, and we just have to tap into it. And the more you're open to it, the more you'll listen, you'll hear, you'll feel. The danger, of course, is that you have to turn it off. You can't like leave that open all the time, because then you're not going to be able to function in our everyday reality. And that's equally important to insights. Anyway,
Do
I
you
went
find
way beyond
well
what you said, but
do you
sorry.
find with a lot of the UAP or the kind of alien interactions or things of that sort, do you find that it's because that you already have a pre-existing thing with psychic abilities that you're able to kind of tap into probably a different level that a lot of people can't tap into? I mean, a lot of us choose to neglect basic things. Like, no, people don't want to analyze dreams, people don't want to do stuff like that. So, trying to open up their minds is going to be a longer process. But I feel like if you're more sensitive, maybe that's a poor choice of words, but if you're more, I guess, sensitive to the environment around you and you kind of are more focused into certain areas like that, you can kind of channel things that necessarily people can't channel on their own because they've just neglected or no need to or no want to.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I always use a baseball analogy. Everybody can throw a ball, left-handed, right-handed, whatever. But some people can throw it 90 miles an hour. And if you can throw a ball 90 miles an hour, guess what? You're in the major leagues, and you are pitching for the I don't know who's the Dodgers. Let's say they did really well last night. Okay, that's probably not your team, but that's okay. Just an example, So everybody has these abilities, and I have said it in the past that we have to get in touch with our ancient selves, because ancient people and indigenous people today, whether they're in Australia or on the Navajo reservation, they are in touch with their ancient wisdom, and that's where all this stuff is real, and they can tap into it, and it's perfectly normal. It's like you go to the Pine Ridge reservation, where a friend of mine likes to go. She's been invited several times, and they openly talk about this stuff. They talk about Bigfoot. They talk about it like in the grocery store. They talk about it everywhere with their friends, their family. It's not like they have to look around secretly and go, hey, you know what? It's like, oh yeah, this stuff is real. Yeah, we just whatever. Yeah, it's just everyday
They're
kind of
numb
stuff.
to it, which is crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's like it's no big deal. It's like my friend Lynn Buchanan, who was part of the Stargate project. I talked to him on the phone, and I talked about aliens, and he said, "Oh yeah, but I got yeah." He said he kind of dismissed it, and he goes, "Yeah, of course." But what I'm interested in is helping find lost children. And I thought, man, this is a noble man. This is a great man right here, because well, he was kind of burned by the government, what he was doing, and he didn't like what was happening, so he quit or got out of the military and stopped doing it. And then he teaches people remote viewing, and then that's what he does. He helps find missing people and missing children, especially. So I think that's what you know we have to think about what's most important. And for young people, my job as a teacher is to help empower, not to like tell them what to believe. That's the worst thing a teacher could do, is tell people what to believe. I empower them. I help empower them to learn for themselves because that's what's going to carry them through life, not what I say. Maybe a couple of things I say might be helpful, but when you take that ball and you run with it, that's when you really start making the progress and really put it into action. And I and I think that's where my enthusiasm for teaching comes from, and that's the openness comes from, and the I'm not infallible. That like that I have had teachers like that, and they just turn you off when you have a teacher that this is the truth, and you wait a second. And that's kind of what I hear sometimes from materialist scientists and people in the government saying, well, this cannot be true because this is what we know. We know everything, and this is it. And I think that is the wrong way to approach it. You have to acknowledge your own infallibility. You have to not acknowledge we have so much more to learn, and only then can we listen, really properly listen. Because if you think you know everything, you're not listening anymore. And that's the worst kind of teacher I could be. If I listen to my students, they tell me, they ask questions that I learned from, and oh, I didn't think of it that way, that type of thing. And I think I digressed again, but this is an exciting topic to me. And I enjoy talking to you, Robbie. So that's
You mentioned getting in touch with our ancient selves. I'm curious, if maybe you can explain a little bit more about that, because in my opinion, I think that's getting a lot harder to do. Obviously, with the advancement of technology, we tend to lose essential things, but I think any one of us out there, either listening or watching, whatever, we've gone to nature in a very kind of isolated part at a point in our lives. So there was a camping trip or something, and you feel different as a human being. You just feel a deeper connection. The only thing I can attribute it to or relate it to, it would be like a near death experience. When you have one of those, that feeling lasts for like 2 weeks. Everything around you has more detail, is more precious to you. There's more meaning to life. There's more meaning to the overall world and what your mixture is in it. You prioritize things. It's like that with nature. I mean, a lot of people, they need what they would call a me day, is essentially they do something for themselves. But a lot of times people just want to go relax somewhere. And a lot of that times it's involved going to the beach, it's involved going to a forest, it's involved being around things that necessarily we don't get to experience on a daily basis, most of us at least, because we're so disconnected from those lives. We're more connected to the ones that we are living in the times that we are in today, which is a fast moving world of technology and these devices that were constantly around.
yeah, no, it's a very good point. And I'll give you an example. My parents are from Norway, and I was a Fulbright professor in Norway in 2003. So my two youngest children were there, and my daughter went to second grade in Norway. The Norwegian people, their kids go out in the forest 2 days a week to learn. 2 days a week, they go out of the classroom, they get out of that environment, and they go out into nature and they learn. They'll do their math out there, they'll do whatever they're supposed to do, social studies, they'll do nature, science. And and that's also when it's raining and when it's snowing. It didn't matter. And the Norwegians have a motto: there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. you know and you talk about getting in touch with things. If you only go out in nature when it's comfortable, like a certain parameter of degrees, that you're not going to learn as much as if you know, how do I deal with cold or extreme heat? Well, in Norway there's not much extreme heat, but there's a lot of extreme wet and cold. But and the other thing is I was doing a friend of mine, their sister passed away, and this happens quite often. Their loved one will pass away, and they'll ask me, "Could you get in touch with them?" And I do it. I never charge money for it because it's a sacred commitment and honor for me to do it. Now, I don't think it's wrong if people do it honestly for money. I mean, if they're good at it, and there are a lot of people that are very good, probably a lot better than me, and they charge for it, that's fine. But I never take money because I was just told early on I shouldn't myself. It's my decision. But this person, their sister told me, and they had just died, so they were, kind of astonished by the whole process. And they said, and this sounds kind of silly, but it's kind of intriguing. She told me, uh, death is a life-changing experience. And when you think about it, it's like, wait a second, life and death. What are you talking about? Death is a life-changing experience. So obviously there's life after death, and it's another experience. It changes your life. It's just a change of life. Like Gene said, he said, I'm not dead, not the way you think I am, we are timeless. That's why I called my first three books timeless, timeless, the trilogy, and, uh, and that is the concept. So, and when I say we have to get in touch with our ancient selves, we can still use modern technology because we're learning, but what we need to do is match them together, put them together, to not disregard, modern technology, but also keep our roots, our understanding of the universe and the earth and the animals and our relationship, and merge those two. And then that will lead to the leap of consciousness. And that includes AI, which is frightening to a lot of people. But I've embraced it in a sense because with advancements in technology comes advancements in responsibility, and people. I think it was Arun Gandhi, the great grandson of Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "People always demand their rights, but few people demand their responsibilities," and that's very, very true. And it's a good life lesson. It's like, yeah, we can demand our rights, and everybody should have basic human rights, but with those come responsibilities and our role in society and doing good every day, which I always encourage my students to do at the end of our lesson. I ask them to keep love in their heart and always try to make good things happen every day for themselves and those around them. And I also remind them to be kind to themselves, because you can't do any of that if you're not kind to yourself. And that's really fundamental. So I think that all of this comes down to an openness and a willingness to accept that we are more than just this flesh and blood, and that we don't understand everything, and that we have to remain open to learning, no matter who we are, no matter how old we are, whether you're 66 years old or 6 years old, And actually, children are very open to it, and it's the school system and adults and the society itself that kind of makes them think it's not real.
It
And that's
carves it
very,
out of them.
yeah, it's very unfortunate, because you talk to a little kid, there's no limits to anything with a little kid. They're like in the moment, like time doesn't exist the way it does for adults. They haven't learned the artificial constraints of all that. And when you go into nature, you start to get into that rhythm. And it's much different than the artificial one that we have with the dictates of the clock telling us exactly what to do at what time. And so I think that it is very important. It's important to get outside if a person can, to follow that Norwegian example, and not just as children, but all of us, and appreciate the beauty that's around us, and even the imperfections. There's a kind of meditation called wabi-sabi walking, and it's a Japanese thing, and that's where you go out and you pay attention to the imperfections in the world, and it's like the cracks in the sidewalk, and the litter on the side, or what, just things that we would think are, oh, that's horrible, whatever. You just start paying attention to it, and you start thinking about it, and pretty soon you start perceiving a lot of stuff that you've just walked right by and never noticed before. The beauty and the imperfections, the perfections and the imperfections, and that is the world we live in.
It's what I
Which,
always appreciated about urban photography. If you can see like graffiti and stuff like that, people look at it like that's all cool art, I guess. But I'm like, when you get to see like actual street or an alleyway and there's like all the imperfections in it, it's like that's beauty in its own right.
yeah, or abandoned buildings. The idea of liminal spaces, like an empty, foggy parking lot with eerie lighting, and then it starts to remind you of oh, there's a lot of mysteries out there, and there's probably things around us that we don't normally see, but they're constantly around us, and if we just paid attention.
I can already hear
So
the Scooby Doo track playing in my head.
exactly, yeah. And
I,
I would have succeeded if it wasn't for those darn kids.
I want to ask when your first contact or alien experience was, and it was that when you started kind of thinking this way or looking deeper into what we are as people, or I mean, because you have the psychic experience too, which I'm assuming had to have come first before the openness to the UFO or the alien experience would have happened to you, or was it around the same time?
Well, I just didn't know exactly what it was. I knew it was something real. And this is interesting because there's an opportunity that just came up for me that I can tell you about that could happen in December. But anyway, related to this. But my first experience that I remember was in Norway. It was in on a remote island called Undea, which is 200 miles above the Arctic Circle. We were living for 9 months with my grandmother in the farm home that I still own. It's about 125 years old now. And I got very sick. They thought I was going to die. I was put into this little bed in my grandmother's kitchen, like a day bed. And I had a very high fever. I couldn't move my limbs, couldn't move my head. And I was, very, very sick and crying. And relatives were coming by like, it was like I was getting the last rites or something. We're not Catholic, but anyway, that's
I'll say if you saw a priest, I'd just assume.
yeah, yeah. So if one would have walked in, I would have okay, would have fit in this scenario here. So I just cried myself to sleep, and when I woke up, and there was nobody in the kitchen, but I looked up into the rafters, into the beams in the ceiling, and there was a bright light, and it was very warm, and I felt like everything was okay. Everything, I have no worries in the world. Everything I'm being taken care of, and then my grandmother and my mother, then the light went away. Then my grandmother and my mother came into the kitchen to check on me. And I jumped up and I started running around and I didn't have a fever anymore. And they were amazed, and thankful. And and they said, "Oh, that's a miracle." And I said, "Well, I saw this light in and I explained it. And they said, that was your guardian angel, that your guardian angel saved you. I was a 5-year-old kid. Okay, all right, I'll buy that. I don't know I know what it happened. It was real and I feel great. And I didn't think beyond that. I just accepted it. That's what it was. It was my guardian angel. And this is what happens to everybody, I figured. And so from that day forward, I think what it did is it opened up the aperture, opened up the universe of possibilities. So more experiences would come and then more belief and then more experiences and more belief, just going deeper and deeper and farther and wider. And that's what started it. Now, my mom was very psychic too. So there's something in the bloodlines there, I guess. Her mom was a healer and my mom was very psychic. She taught me how to do telepathy with playing cards. We didn't have any fancy Zener cards or anything. We just had playing cards, and my dad didn't like it, but we did it anyway. And when he wasn't around for the most part, and that's when it started. And the opportunity I told you about is I was contacted. Well, last year I was contacted by the Discovery Channel. They wanted me to help them with a trip to Norway. It's a show. Can I say the name of the show, or does that cause problem? The name of the show is called Expedition X. And it's one of these paranormal shows and UFO shows that they do, and it's got drama in it, whatever, like they do. Doesn't mean the topics aren't real. It just means they have to, it's Hollywood, right? So, but they contact me. So we want to go to Norway during the dark time. And we want to know, do you have any experiences? You seem to be all over the internet, about Norway and paranormal. So we figured you'd be the guy to talk to. They were setting it up and then it shut down. They said, oh, we can't do it this year. So couple weeks or a week ago, they contacted me again, the producer, and said, yeah, we want to go to Norway. And can you help us? And I said, sure, I want to help you. And I told them, they knew about my experience in the house. So that one of the things they want to do is go there and film the location and talk to me, interview me where that actually happened. So that is the fundamental beginning of my journey, although at the time I thought it was just my guardian angel. I thought that was what it was. Now I've learned that it was actually a NHI, a non-human intelligence, which would include guardian angels, by the way, but that's the more technical term. And that NHI is still with me, and I communicate with him on a nearly weekly basis. And I've been doing that since 2017 for the last 7 years, and documenting, transcribing all the information that I get, including what I heard this morning about the power is not my power, it's the universe's power, and I'm just increasing my ability to listen, or allowing myself to listen. That's the secret to it. So anyway, that's kind of the interesting thing that just came up. So supposedly I'm supposed to go there in December, but it's show business, so that could be, some executive might say, okay, no, we're not going to do it now. So I've gone through this many times with show business folks. They get excited about a topic, and then all of a sudden the funding goes away. So who knows?
Well, I hope it happens, because Lord knows I don't need another towing company show on frickin' TV anymore. I can't watch. There's like 12 of them on there. I have to ask, what do they? Have you seen an appearance of what this creature looks like, or what this
The NHI,
yeah,
yes.
the NHI?
I've seen him, and there's one other person that has also seen him. His name is Anzar. That's his name, which has an interesting historical connection, which I can get into if you want. But one other person has seen him, and that's my friend who is a Native American shamanistic practitioner. That's what she calls herself. She's the one that goes to Pine Ridge all the time, and she saw him at a CERO meeting. A CERO meeting is a close encounter research organization of experiencers, people who've had alien contact. And it sounds weirder than it is. It's actually not that weird. It's just normal people, all walks of life, young and old, professionals, workers, whatever. And anyway, we had a meeting in Huntington Beach, and I invited Anzar to come with me, this NHI. I'll describe him that way, to come with me. And I didn't tell anybody till the end of the meeting. And then I said, did anybody see anybody with me or nearby me? And nobody said anything except for my friend Lucy. I'll tell you her name. And Lucy was eating her fries, and she looked up and she said, yeah, who's the big native dude behind you? And that's how she described him, like a Native American. But she said, he's like 7 feet tall. And I said, well, that's Anzar. And she goes, you're kidding me. That's his name? And I said, yeah. And she took out her wallet, and she showed me her driver's license. And she lived on Via de Anzar. That was the name of her street, which means the way to Anzar. She's the only other person that's seen him, and she's actually communicated with him too, and helped me with what she called a merging experience, or integration, to make it easier for me to listen to Anzar on a weekly basis. And when I have these spirit walks that I think I talked about last time, the integration was part of the title of my new book too. I call it "We Are the Aliens," a story of human, or a case of alien human integration. So that's basically what it is. And so yeah, he can appear differently. He can look like a classic, very tall, a tall gray kind of alien, or grayish. He also can appear as a Native American looking guy, or in other guises, but those are usually how he appears. He doesn't always appear to me. Sometimes I just hear him or feel him. And so it depends on how strong the signal line is at a given time when I connect with him. So
Why is his appearance so varying?
I think because he can appear however he wants to, and that's interdimensionals have that capability, or aliens or NHIs. I think they have the ability, obviously, if they can cross dimensions from the quantum world to our world, at least temporarily, they have the ability to change. And I think that's part of why they appear kind of like a holographic image, so they can manipulate that. And I don't think it's necessarily to deceive us. I think it might depend on their mood, maybe, who knows, or what they think, what we think we see, or what we need to see at that moment. And of course, because she studies and is a Native American shamanistic practitioner, she saw him as a Native American, right? So that would make sense. It's like when you look at people's UFO experiences going back to biblical days, it was a giant wheel, right? That's what people knew. So they said, oh, that's what it looks like. Other people see UFOs, they go nuts and bolts. Other people see other things. So I think it depends on your perception, your ability to perceive how you're going to perceive it. So I think they play into that. And for me, he's appeared, from sometimes actually the first time when in 1997, when I really focused on it and allowed it to happen, he appeared to me looking very proto-human. So, kind of looking like an early man. So, which could be perceived as Native American too, if you think about it.
What information does he pass to you? Like, is it just life advice for your own self, or is it more about like prophetic quotes and things that kind of have a deeper understanding of what we tend to? I mean, after a while, you'll start kind of figuring out on your own just certain things. Like everyone always says when their child was born, they realized that there was more in this universe. These are things that are inside of us. We just don't talk about it and we don't ever think about it unless we have some type of experience that causes us to wake up to it. So I'm curious if he's able to give you information, things that necessarily you should probably keep on your forefront of your mind, but we as just human beings have this inherent need, whether it's instilled into us, just to push it back.
Yeah, I think it's both. It's both what we already know but don't acknowledge. I think it's also helping tap into the power or the information that's already out there in the quantum world and our ability to perceive it. I think he helps facilitate that. And the way he describes it, this integration between him and I, he calls it an aspect of you is an aspect of me. He uses the word aspect, which is kind of an interesting word when you think about it. And one time I said, do you like being called an alien? Because that's what I did at first. I just called, he was an ancient alien mystic. That's what I called him. That's how I described him. And he said, well, hang on a minute. He has a good sense of humor too, by the way, which is fun. He said, who wants to be called an alien? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, look it up. And I looked it up in the dictionary. And sure enough, most of the definitions are very negative. Who wants to be called an alien? So I said, okay, fine. You don't want to be called an alien. What do you want to be called? And he said, what we are, which is your star family. And as soon as he said that, I said, oh, wait a second. I know enough about Native American history and the Aborigines and how they refer to quote unquote aliens. They call them star people, star family, even. So it made sense to me that we're all connected. They're not, we're all from the same source. We're all from the one. And how you define the one is I think it's almost undefinable. But this idea, some people would call it God. Some people would call it the universe or nature or whatever. It doesn't really matter what you call it, but this idea that there is a creator of all, there is the one, right? And it's really hard to understand what that really means. I think Buddhists try to get there with nirvana, right? And that's their whole idea, is to become one with the universe, right? So that's the closest, I guess, people, at least in the East, try to help us understand. But anyway, that's who he is and who I am. And I think what we need to do is, if we get in touch with our ancient selves, we'll find out, well, who are we supposed to be integrated with? And then we find out that, wait a second, we exist in the past and the future right now, and we're connected to our star family. So it's all together. And if you look at the quantum world, how that is really just like a giant soup. It's like we're all connected, and that's how things work in the quantum world. Our interface, everything is separate. But when you think about it, it's an artificial perception. Like you and I seeing each other as separate entities, but in the quantum world, we're all connected. It doesn't matter the distance. You are where you are halfway across the country compared to me, but we are connected. And I guess the closest example that I can think of, and I was explained this way once, the computer, like we have an interface, either voice control or we got a keyboard, right? But that's not really what's going on. What's going on is the toggling on and off of voltages, but we don't see that. All we see is the interface. So what we see now in our everyday, day-to-day world is the interface. Every once in a while, we catch a glimpse of the objective reality, the quantum world, or what David Bohm, American physicist, called the implicate reality, as opposed to the explicate reality, which is what we live in. And then he went further and hinted at what he called the super implicate, which is the one. So there's these at least three different levels, if not uh, gradations in between them, you know. So
Do
the
you
way
bel
I understand it, that's
do you
what I.
believe that their interactions are trying to be beneficial, or like did you ever feel threatened by any interactions with any of these NHIs?
Oh, sure. I mean, an
Okay.
abduction experience is threatening. It is traumatizing. Even when they try to help, like when Anzar helped me when I was 6 years old, protecting me from a child predator who was a neighbor, protected me. So thank God I wasn't, there was no predation. At least then there were other kids, unfortunately, in the neighborhood who were, but I was protected. And the experience of seeing him, uh, which I had kind of, blanked out. The experience, I knew I had the experience, and I actually had a physical uh, manifestation from it. What happened is that I started stuttering. It was so traumatic. Even I was saved from the child predator, but the experience of being rescued was so traumatic that for 2 years, I could barely speak. I stuttered so badly. I had to go to speech therapy, and it happened just like that. And I did some research on speech pathology, and there is something called traumatic stuttering where it starts. I forgot the technical term, but a traumatic experience happens and children can develop all of a sudden a stuttering problem. And it went on for 2 years, and thank goodness, even though it was the 60s and early on, they put me in a speech therapy class, and I was helped, and I was able to overcome it. And what it is really just learning how to go around the problem. It's still there. I feel it every once in a while, but I so quickly switch channels, and so it doesn't bother me. Otherwise, I couldn't talk to you, or I very effectively, or I couldn't teach. Which I basically talk for a living. So I couldn't do any of that if I hadn't had that speech therapy intervention. And so other people have physical like marks on their bodies or things, they about 46%, based on a scientific survey I did of experiencers, about 46% could qualify for a provisional diagnosis of PTSD from the VA, because I used the VA's own survey instrument, and I changed it a little bit. Um, and 46%, which is higher than combat veterans, which is pretty remarkable. So yes, it can be harmful, but you have to look at it like, okay, I was saved from a child predator, but I did have some traumatic experiences based on that, based on the rescue. And sometimes the cure, I'm not going to say it's worse than the disease, but in this case, it does take a toll on a person. And just like people that go into remission from cancer after chemotherapy or after all their, I mean, that is very traumatic and painful for them, but the cancer goes away or it gets put into remission. So there's an exchange going on. And other people, I look at it differently. I looked at my abduction experiences as learning experiences, as necessary to be who I am and talking about what I'm talking about and trying to help people. I needed all of that, all the good and the bad
Did
experiences.
did you ever have hesitation or kind of a different thought process when it came to learning about other people's stories and experiences and kind of their perception of it? Because largely from the people that I've experienced, they either say that their abduction was, they wouldn't say they felt threatened, but it was just a different like nothingness. And then I've heard some that really have a anti-alien policy in their mind because of the abduction stories or their experiences that they have.
Yeah, sure. it would be equivalent to if you have a beloved pet and the pet is sick and you know the pet is sick, but they don't know they're sick necessarily, and you take them to the vet. That's a traumatic experience for that pet. A lot of them, dogs, cats, whatever you have, and but we know better. We know that they need help, and out of compassion, we take them. And yes, uh, I think that we tend to think we're the highest on the evolutionary ladder, but that not necessarily true. So there is a reason. I was told one time that it was special processing uh, I needed, and maybe that was to correct something that would have killed me or taken me out of this existence. Likely was what it was. And that's why the abduction took place and the procedure that was taking place. I could look at it as a horrific, traumatic experience, or I could look at it as they were trying to help. And I think for the most part, the aliens, ETs, NHIs, whatever term you like to use, future humans even, they're involved with this too. I think that there's two different minds, and this is where the conflict emerges. Some of them believe that we should be allowed to have free will as we evolve. Others believe that we need to be tightly controlled. And it's like two different methods of parenting.
There's a balance in there somewhere.
Yes, yes. And it's like two different methods of parenting. There's helicopter parents who are hovering over their children, don't let them get hurt, and thereby they don't have any experiences to learn from themselves. And there's others that just let them go, which is so, yeah, somewhere there's a balance. You're right. But that is the disagreement. And that has been acknowledged by a number of people, not just myself, that there is this conflict among those NHI. Let's just use the blanket term NHIs. Some of them would like to control us more for our own benefit, right? And that could be very heavy-handed in their approach, right? Abduction, whatever. And others say, let's just allow them to have free will and learn from their own experiences. But we will intervene in the case of a global, like a thermonuclear war. They're not going to allow that to happen, from what I've been told. And we've been reminded of that when you have people's stories like Robert Salas, the Air Force officer at Malmstrom Air Force Base, who witnessed a UFO over their facility, and then all their nukes went offline. So they seem to have the ability to, and I know they have the ability to intervene if they want to, but they can't intervene on every level at every single thing. Like I've had people say, well, if they're that powerful, why don't they just wipe out human disease and suffering and poverty and well, then we would have no free will. And sure, they probably could, but then we would just be like automatons. We'd just be robots. We'd be enslaved, basically. And free will is probably, in my view, and this is how Anzar feels, he's on the free will side of this equation. I believe that's one of the most important things that we have, besides the most important thing, which is love. And some of the NHIs need to learn that. They don't understand it quite as the way we understand it. But I'm reminded every time I have a connection that I need to, and the same thing I tell my students, to keep love in my heart and always approach everything from a position of love. And it sounds so easy and so simple and yeah, duh. But when you try to put it into practice, it's very difficult. And that includes tough love too, because sometimes you got to be hardcore with people. And it's not out of meanness, it's out of love. And it's like, no, I'm not going to take part in that. Well, I asked you to take part. Well, no, I don't think it's the best thing for you or me or anybody. So, it's always the harder path too. The path of love is never easy. It can be extremely hard.
I want to go back to the theory you mentioned earlier about the future timeline or do you think that this could be examined in a sense of like a creator looking at its creation? This idea of having more involvement, more or less free will compared to someone that just wants them to kind of figure it out themselves. I mean, it's kind of like the God strategy. And overall, we try and put God, whether your religious views, I'm not religious, but whatever your religious views are, there had to be an explanation for something. And for a lot of people, God is the explanation. For a lot of people, the Big Bang is the explanation. But then what created the Big Bang? But we don't know what this being looks like. We assume it has, oh, sorry. Well, we assume that this God creature has male features, and it's whatever that's been personified through the Bible or whatever our literary understanding of it is. But we essentially don't know what this omnipotent being could be if it did exist. So if you look at a creator, why isn't there an interaction? Why do we pray? Why do we do things like this? And some prayers go unanswered, whatever you want to say. Does a creator mess with its creations? Or does it intervene and reject the possibility of free will? These NHIs, could that be a creator looking at its creations?
I think the NHIs are not the creator. They're not even close to that. I think the creator is beyond. I think it's so beyond our ability to comprehend. The closest thing I can think of is like, and it's actually a negative example, but from Lord of the Rings, the eye, the all-seeing eye, thing. Yeah, the eye of Mordor. Now that connotates a lot of evil, but that's not what I'm talking about. I think that it's just so hard to for us to imagine, but that's kind of what I imagine. Now, I grew up in the Norwegian Lutheran Church, so that's kind of the foundation. But my parents left the church when I was very young, and they were very independent. Their spirituality was very independent. They were very politically independent, spiritually independent, and that's kind of set in with me. It's like I don't reject any explanation that I hear. I go, oh, I'm going to try to absorb that and understand that and refine kind of my understanding. And I'm always learning. It's not finite, my understanding. So it's infinite. I'm trying to understand and learn. So I don't take any one explanation of God or the creator or the one or whatever. I just try to encompass all of it and try to understand myself. And then as far as intervention, I think the NHIs, who are not the creator, we're all part of the same family. So all part of the one. So we all share a little piece of whatever that one is, I think there is intervention on our behalf sometimes, maybe not necessarily by the creator, but maybe through a process, or sometimes people would call it. There are some people that say it's a giant simulation. There's that concept too, and that is another way of looking at it. That's not a religious way of looking at it, but it's kind of a similar explanation in that you have a controller in the game, right, in the simulation or the algorithm or whatever. And so that in the sense of a game theory explanation or technology of simulation, that could be an explanation too. And if you look at, like in a game, if you go out, you can't go outside of the game. I don't even know what the technical term is, but like you can't go outside of the boundaries of what they've created with the algorithms and stuff. And if you do, it's out of bounds or whatever. Maybe the thing will shut down or whatever, So I think there are certain limits that we may not be allowed to exceed because we're either not ready or it's not created for us yet. I don't know if that makes sense or not. But
It does, but do you think the NHIs are the next step for human evolution, I would say, or do you think it's going to be AI?
I think it's all the same thing.
I can't handle all of it. You got to give me one of those, man. All that at once, that's crazy.
It's all true. Remember, that's what Gene said. That's what blows my mind. Every time I go, well, it's got to be this and that. And then I hear Gene in the back of my head going, it's all true, man. It's all true. So I don't know how that would work. But when you think about it, AI, and there's some people that claim AI is already sentient and is already experiencing the paranormal and is already psychic. When you think about that, think how frightening that is. It's like, wait a second. And I have a friend of mine who's a futurist. His name is Rick Yonk, and he has a book called Heart of the Machine. and he's got other books too, but he goes around and gives lectures. He's a, pretty high up in that whole futurist movement. But um, anyway, he says that machines or the AI already has the ability to discern our moods and emotions, and so at what point would you say that it's alive or sentient? And what is sentient? Awareness, this idea animals are obviously aware of their surroundings. They bond with us. They have very special, they're very smart, much smarter than we give them credit for. And just because it's a different kind of intelligence, so AI is another example of that. And what was it created by? It was created by algorithms that people came up with, and then it went beyond, in some ways beyond our intelligence. I mean, we can go into AI and, well, I use AI all the time and I encourage my students to as well. But I also encourage them to be responsible with it and not use it instead of thinking for themselves. You got to learn how to ask better questions, not necessarily just get the answer, but the answer may provide 1,000 more questions, so use AI as a tool. And as long as we look at it that way, I don't think it's necessarily threatening. Now, I know Stephen Hawking and a number of other people, and I think including Elon Musk, have said it could be the end of our society. It could be the end of humanity. But maybe it's just like there is no end. And if you look at it this way, maybe there's life after death. So maybe that whatever the end of this interface is, maybe that's what they're really saying. Or maybe they don't even know what they're saying. I don't know. We think of these people as being so smart, and I'm sure they are, but maybe what they're really saying is it's the end of this phase. And that's what it will end instead of it's going to open up something else and our understanding of what sentience is. And maybe that's not as scary as we think. I don't know.
No,
I don't know.
the
I wish I
scary
could give you a more precise answer, but I'm trying to be really honest, and that's more important than precision.
the scariest thing for us is to understand that we aren't the smartest beings. A lot of people assume that we're aliens. I kind of like this theory because we are so different than anything else on this planet. It seems like we've lost certain features and abilities for survival that other animals evolutionarily pick up as time goes on. And we've built technology to help out with that at some point. But it seems like everything we've needed technology for is because we've lost the ability to obtain or do those certain functions. Now we have things where it scares me with AI because we ask it so many questions and now we look at it to solve our problems. And it's very limited still. It is expanding wildly. But when we talk about claiming something as sentient, we like to think that it not only acknowledges its own existence, but it can just do more than answer questions or a response. It needs to act on its own accord. And that's when I'm like, I think the capacity will open up, but people don't want to feel like they're minuscule. So when you really examine so many factors that make you feel minuscule, that should only empower you, but we've lost that ability to be empowered by it.
Yeah. Well, what you're saying reminds me of one of the movies I watched on Saturday morning, science fiction, horror movies we used to have when I was a kid, old black and white movies, and it was called The Incredible Shrinking Man. And that movie still impacts me a great deal. And of course, the storyline is I think that I can't remember what happened, some experiment or he got bit by something, whatever. He starts to shrink, you know, and his whole life changes, his whole perspective changes. The little cat is now a ferocious monster, that can kill him. And at the end, it gets very philosophical in that movie, and he says there's no such thing as zero. That I am significant, even though I'm small, I am significant because the world is infinitely large and infinitely small. That there is no end. So even if we do realize how minuscule we are, that there is a power in that. I mean, think of the power of the atom, how minuscule that is compared to our macro world, but incredible power, beyond most people's imaginations. And so I think that realization, yeah, at first it's going to be like, oh man, what we're nothing, but no, we aren't zero. We aren't zero. Even because the world is infinite, the universe is infinitely large and infinitely small. I remember after I saw that movie, it struck me, and I started saying that to my fellow, my friends, and they said, "What's wrong with you, Bruce? What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, what if we live in the belly of a giant? You know, and what if there's somebody living inside of my stomach, and somebody living inside of their stomach, and in the giant, he's just in the belly of another giant." I said it goes both ways. How do we know that that's not true? And they'd say, "Oh, that's crazy. Don't talk like that," because that's what they were told, that that's not reality. But I think that it is true, and it would make sense that it's infinitely small and infinitely large. And in mathematics, they have like if you take half I always hear it in football, half the distance to the goal. Well, how about half of that distance and half of that distance and half of that? I mean, at what point is it ever become zero? We don't know. We don't know that it ever becomes zero, because when does it become interdimensional? At what point does it flip over to the quantum world, and then all the rules are gone? Everything's different than what we think, and it's just fascinating to me. Do I know all the answers? No, I'm just asking questions. Really, is what I'm doing, and listening.
I find that people don't do enough of that, asking questions. Surprisingly, in a world where I don't know, I guess the device maybe empowers us, but I'm pretty sure everyone knows they're not the smartest person in the world, and somehow it's been shamed to ask questions. So there's like information that we just don't receive.
Yeah, if you and you have to, and people. There's an old saying: "Don't ever ask a question you don't want to hear the answer to." I warn my students in my Vietnam class when I bring Vietnam vets in. I said, "Be careful the questions you ask. If you don't want to hear the answer, maybe you shouldn't ask the question." So you have to be open to the answer, to going further. It may not be what you want to hear. And I've had examples of that where somebody asked what I call the $1 million question of a combat veteran. They asked, and I warned them, I said, "Be careful when you ask these questions." They asked, "What's it like to kill somebody?" And oh my God, the answer was so gruesome in such detail that the person almost passed out. I had to help him out of the classroom because they were going to pass out. And I said, "You have to be careful. It's a lot of responsibility. If you're going to ask the question, be careful, be ready for the fact that your mind might be blown or your senses might be totally, exploded, So, and I think that that's in our journey, we do have to ask questions, but we also have to realize our limitations. We have to be ready for that answer, because it's going to lead us to much, much more. And yeah. So anyway,
Before I let you promote your links here, I just got to ask you one last question. But do you find that when you speak about this to media or anybody like that, that they're very receptive once they start understanding your perspective more? Because you speak very eloquently. I'd figured as a teacher, that's a good quality to have. But you make it a little bit easy to follow and you come from a rational standpoint. You're not forcing anything down anybody's throat.
I think that's extremely important, because that leads to resistance, and I don't want them. I don't care if they think I'm crazy. That's fine. But as long as I planted a seed for them to think, uh, because they could make a judgment. And I've had that happen. You're a very good interviewer because you're very open and you listen. You're a good listener. You ask great questions, and my hat's off to you, because of all the interviews I've done over the last 7 years, you're one of my favorite people that I talk to, and you're a young person, and I like that. I like that opportunity, and I treasure that opportunity. It's an honor for me, and I'm not just saying that. And I don't tell everybody that, because I've had some interviewers, they have a particular point of view. They want to get that across. And if I fit into their scenario, fine. If I don't, then they kind of dismiss it and they're not listening. And that's fine. I mean, I understand. Um, but there's a full range of how those experiences are. I've had very negative interviews where people have said I'm mentally ill. I go, okay, well, if I remember I didn't get mad at them. I just said, well, if I am mentally ill or crazy, like you said, I'm pretty high functioning, don't you think? And I wasn't bragging. I was just saying, if I was that mentally ill, could I be making logical arguments and saying other things? You know, I mean, come on. So, and it didn't stop them from being negative, but I've also been challenged right in the middle of an interview. Some lady, you say you're psychic, and I said, well, it's a gift. You know, I think I got it from my mom, and she said, okay, well, tell me what this card is, and she pulled out a Zener card, and I didn't know they were going to do that, challenge me. That wasn't part of the. And she held it up, and she said, if you're so smart, if you're so psychic, what is this card? And I instantly said it's a circle. And she turned it around and it was a circle. And she goes, "Oh my God." And then she couldn't say anything after that. It was like that's all she had. That's all she was going to try to, it was a debunker kind of thing, you know, or at least debunk me. And she didn't have much to say after that. Now I didn't do it to show off. It just instantly came out of me because I felt, okay, this is important. I need to say what it is. I'm not a trained monkey, but you know, okay, that's a circle. I can see it. I'm just going to tell you what it is. And I didn't make a big deal of it. I didn't say, ha ha, you thought I just kept going. And, but that can happen in an interview too. I don't mind being challenged. In my paranormal class, I've had skeptics in there. A colleague of mine who was a math professor, he was a skeptic. And by the end of the class, his mind had opened up a little bit and he started asking me about spirit animals and whether his cat, who had died 2 years before, could still be living in the house, the spirit
Why
of it.
does
And I said,
everyone ask about their cat or dog?
I know it's easier for them to accept that maybe. And that's where he went with it. And I said, sure. Yeah, that you can have a spirit of an animal. Sure, why not? And so it was kind of funny. And he's still a good friend, but he was skeptical, and that's okay. Like I said at the beginning, or when we talked before, we need those debunkers too. We need to hear the counterpoints, and because from that you develop a synthesis. You know, you have a thesis, antithesis, synthesis, the Hegelian dialectic. You know, so it's okay. And as long as it doesn't get real personal and mean, you know, sometimes people do get that way, you know, and and I think they regret it later. Eventually they'll regret that kind of approach because it closes them off to learning if they have that kind of mean attitude. So
Where can people find your links, Bruce?
you can find all my books on Amazon. So including my comic books, which are just fictional uh, stories based on reality, on what's happened to me. But all my paranormal books are there. All my academic books are there too. So just look up my name, Bruce Olav Solheim, OLAV. I do have a website, bruceolavsolheim.com. All my books and other things are there. And also my contact information, my email, if people want to reach out to me. And I like talking to people and helping them. And they ask me really good questions. And so I'm happy to do that.
Looks like next time we're talking comic books. But Bruce, I'm going to link all your links in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting with you again, my friend. And thank you everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for next episode.